Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining the webinar on integration using iVend APIs. My name is Agnish and I have my colleague Priya with me.
Hello everyone.
We will be your host for today. I'm also joined today by the set of panelists who will help me in delivering the session and also answer your queries. As much as I would like to start the session now, let's give a couple of minutes for everyone to settle down and also for the people who are joining in currently. In the meantime, I would like to share with everyone that we have an overwhelming response for today's session where people have joined in from all parts of the world. So very good morning, afternoon and evening to everyone. Before we start, a few housekeeping item list. So for today's session, you can chat live with our panelists. You can also ask question using Ask Question option in your GoToWebinar panel. You can also use raise hand option to raise your hand and we will unmute your line for you to ask the questions. In any case, we will have a question and answer session at the end of this webinar. This is the agenda for today's session. We'll talk about APIs. So we'll cover overview, iVend business object structure, iVend retail web API common functions, how to make a REST call or a SOAP call, and then how to use SoapUI or a Visual Studio for development purposes, sample codes, then how to debug iVend retail web APIs while doing development, third-party integration using APIs, and then we'll continue with some sample Windows service-based integration project. And then last, we'll cover artifacts, which covers developer guide, samples, KB articles, and question and answer session. Well, iVend Retail provides API functions which can be leveraged to integrate with any ERP without hassle of platform dependency. iVend Retail Web Service API is a collection of functions. Basically, it allows you to update, retrieve, and manipulate data in iVend Retail. They are discoverable and then they have discoverable endpoints basically, and then web service protocol. So it supports SOAP, Simple Object Access Protocol, and then it supports SOAP. It has a full support to SOAP with the universal XML format. All right. Now, when we talk about iVend retail business object structure, generally we have two different type of objects. One is master type business object, another is transaction type business object. So in master type, you'll see, for example, customer object, product master, etc. And when it comes to transactions, what you do is in POS you do a transaction. So you have a DTO object to share the data, rather save or get the data, transaction data, payment DTO, and then it's few management console operations like back office operations like purchase order. So these are the transaction type business objects in iVend. Going forward, this is how your master business object looks like. So if you look at the product DTO diagram, it shows that it has so many sub-objects under product DTO. So you have inventory location list, you have product assembly component, you have product inventory, so on and so forth. And similarly, like any simple object like currency DTO, currency object, so you have denomination list, so you can have multiple denominations under one currency. You have then user-defined fields on a currency master. Similarly, if I show you something related to transactional business object, that's transaction DTO object. Now, if you map it to iVend POS transaction operation, then you have AR payments, and then you have delivery items, you have layaways, layaway cancellations, order item, payment, quotation, refunds, sale item, sale person, surcharge, all of those things as sub-object inside transaction DTO object. They are very much accessible via API, iVend web APIs. You can either save or get transaction object very well in this whole structure and you can think of integrating to any third-party application, be it ERP, accounting package, or any other application using iVend web APIs. So few more examples on transaction business object, that's payment type object. So, and then purchase order object. So you'll have line items in purchase order, you have header fields, you have purchase order surcharges. Now, I'll explain you few common web API functions in iVend APIs. They are like, so we have authentication function. This is very specific if you are trying to develop any mobile application on top of iVend. So though we already have iVend mobile POS on Android and iOS both, but then if you are planning to make any new mobile app, then probably you need an authenticate function. This is very specific. That is why the first parameter here is device ID API token. Otherwise, for any other kind of integration, you have common functions, very common functions like get customer, price list, product, transaction, or you want to save a transaction. So there are, I think there are multiple overloaded functions for save transaction, and then save vendor, update gift certificate balance, and very importantly, then you have a get queue function. I'll explain you the get queue function in detail going forward in the webinar. Now, an important note here is that we, with iVend 6.5 release in first quarter 2016, we have a developer guide available for iVend extensibility, in which iVend API is a part. So you will have a full-fledged web-based, CHM-based API guide, which explains you everything about API. Now I would like to show you the file at least for once. So this is how iVend help file or a developer guide looks like for extensibility. It do have a what's new section. It explains you well in detail what all new things are there in extensibility. Now it has introduction, getting started, all FAQ, sample, all the things incorporated in this. Most important parts are developer guide and web API. Developer guide is basically targeting to the audience who would like to create an add-on application to enhance the business functionality of iVend application. But if currently the topic for this webinar is web API, so let's concentrate on that. And we do have what's new section in web APIs, where the first page very clearly explains you that these all objects and these all web API methods are newly exposed in iVend Web APIs 6.5. So this list is self-explanatory, and it explains all the functions very well, what all things are new in the new version of iVend. If you really want to go in more details, then there is a method section in the guide which explains you each and every function available in iVend API help file and gives you brief description about it. If you try, let's say if I have a delete currency operation, then it explains me the parameter requirement and the members and the C# based code sample also how to call this function. So I think this guide is more than enough to understand how API works. And if these function used to take some object as a parameter, then in that case we do have DTO objects which are used to get or post data via these API functions. So for example, I have a currency DTO object. Now we saw the delete currency, so it clearly explains me that these are the properties. This is a mandatory property of a currency DTO. So if I want to save any currency, I know what information I need to pass and what is the parameter data type attached, what is the name of the property I need to fill in. My colleague Priya will help you understand how you can test the API functions before you want to use it in your programming code or while doing integrations. She'll also explain you how you can make a REST or SOAP based call to iVend APIs. Additionally, she'll also explain how we can write a small window service which can keep polling the iVend APIs to fetch or save data back into iVend. Going forward in the webinar now, so I'm coming back to the point that this is the very common list of functions which generally, so by now I can say that iVend application is by now have a mobile app which is our mobile POS, which is fully integrated with iVend using APIs only. We have SAP Business One, Navision, we have Sage 300 integrations, R3 integrations, SAP R3 integrations already done using APIs. So our web APIs are fair enough, powerful and exposed to an extent where any ERP can be integrated for any business cycle. All right. Now going forward, if you install iVend in your dev machine or in your hosting environment anywhere, then in that case you have an option to install APIs along with the main installer, which installs API as a web service in IIS, Microsoft IIS. And now then this URL explains you all the functions very well. Okay, let me try and see if I can open this. It's taking a while, so I will go back to the PowerPoint presentation and continue with the session. In the meantime, it opens up. Good, great. So the next topic would be that that we have a get queue function available in iVend API. Generally, when you do integrations, you always have iVend on one side and any third-party application on the other side. And as a users, they continue to do their transactions in iVend, and then now sitting in the middle, your integration code need to poll the iVend application using web APIs periodically to see what all transactions has happened. So what you do is you write a Windows service kind of an application whereby you keep polling iVend application using the API for new transactional data or master data. Now in iVend APIs we have getQueue method exposed, which gives you the list of all operations which has happened. You can give a parameter like how many records you would like to fetch, what is the client timeout you would like to give to this web call. So in return it gives you the transactions which has happened in iVend and it gives you the array of those transactions. Now what is important is that you have multiple getQueue functions based on your requirement. Now if you use normal getQueue function as specified here, what it do is that it gives you the data and it marks that data in iVend integration queue as consumed. So now it is your responsibility that you store that data in your integration, like probably if you can go for MSMQ or any other queuing mechanism like RabbitMQ or so on and so forth. So that from iVend standpoint, this data once fetched, it's consumed. But if you do not have that storage mechanism while doing integration or any queue mechanism, then what you can do is you can use getQueue without status update function. So here again you specify the same two parameters, but the update status, third parameter, new parameter, you need to pass the default value as false, so that iVend queue by then comes to know that whatever you got from this calling this function in the API is still not consumed. And now once you are done with your business logic in your integration layer, then you call another function, let's say, which is update record status, and you pass your integration key list, whichever you have processed, and it will mark that record done in the iVend integration queue. This way, you do not need a queue mechanism in your integration code layer, and you can straight away rely on iVend to store that, keep that data persistent for you. And so if for some reason you got a failure or error, then in that case, when next time you poll iVend queue, you get the same unprocessed records again to process them from there on, right? So, and then going forward, we have some additional functions for get queue. You can always get the data based on some warehouse ID. Similarly, with status update, without status update. And additionally, you have two more functions which gets you the data which could be for the complete enterprise. So in enterprise, you have data coming from multiple store, and if you are integrating the whole data all together with your, let's say, third-party ERP system, then probably you'll go for get queue for enterprise. And now it depends whether with status update or without status update, up to you how you want to plan your integration layer. Now, this is the last function, update record status, which I already explained you that you need it if you are using without status update function, which I explained you earlier. Then you need this function to call to at least let iVend know that you are done with those transactional data which you fetched from iVend, and now you would like to mark the status update so that next time when you poll the service again, you should not get already processed data. This is to avoid the duplication of processing of the transactional data. All right, now when you generally do integration, you do a get queue, you can get all these kind of objects very easily, and you can identify these objects via an identifier, and then you can write your piece of code to handle these objects in your integration layer and then push them to your third-party application, which is going to be the recipient in this case. Now, the next important topic is how do you make a REST call to iVend Retail Web API? I'll hand it over now the webinar to my colleague Priya, and she'll explain how do we do a REST call.
Thanks, Agnish. As explained, web APIs are can be reached through a REST call. So here I'm going to explain how you can make a REST call to iVend Web API. Just like any other web API, you'll have to provide the REST service URL, which you can get from the installation path where your service has been hosted. So here, because localhost has been used, I am posting the URL for save transaction method. You can choose any other method using the web API help and get the signature for that. Also, you will require the XML payload. iVend APIs work with XML payloads for request and response. So step by step, if we go, first is to define the REST service URL, which is quite simple and common. Second, we'll have to provide the HTTP web request object with the URL. So here I have declared the HTTP web request object and provided the URL to my save transaction method. Next, very important thing, web APIs of iVend are authenticated with API users. That is, if I am going to use a user, I'll have to provide the username and password for the API authenticated user. Let me explain you how an API authenticated user works. So if you are on your enterprise in your management console, you'll have to create an API user, and you can make it using this checkbox, is API authentication user. So here I have an API user which has a username as API user and is API authentication user. So I'm going to provide the details in the header part so that my iVend API knows that this is the user who is going to consume it and it's reliable. So we'll provide the authentication. Also, I'm providing the request method type. Is it post or get? Because my save transaction method is post type, I provided this. You can refer to web API help for the method type. And my XML request, so content type is XML. Now I'll have the response and will consume it. So for that, to check the payload and what are the minimum bare requirements for your payload to have the properties, you can refer to various samples available on knowledge.cityaccess portal. For your reference, I'm going to explain you the same project which I have explained in PPT. So here it is. It is a simple add-on which I have created. First, I have declared a plugin class, which is as simple as explained in an add-on. Second, I have created a custom pause menu here. Firstly, I'm going to declare the URL which is, there are several URLs. You can refer to any of those, and this is just for a sample purpose. And now on execution of this menu, the click of this menu item, I'm going to make a REST call. So if I refer to this save customer, first I'll get the payload for save customer method. Let me show you that I have declared the URL for save customer. Now I'm going to get the request. As you can see, there are payloads for different objects, and we are targeting for save customer. So here is the sample save customer payload. I have provided the ID required, first name, last name, customer group it belongs to, if it's active or not, and the other properties which are required. So here first I have got the XML document, and now I'm going to make a REST call, which is explained in this method. So here in the header, as I discussed earlier, I have provided the details, the username and password for the API authenticated user, which you have to declare in management console, and then processing this document to get the response. And I have saved this web response in a text file, and you can consume it any way as you want. So this is the sample you can use for saving and getting various iVend objects. Here is the prerequisites and the purpose of this sample add-on. This is available on knowledge.ctx portal. Moving back to the PPT.
So the next topic is how do you test APIs using SoapUI? Now, one of the easiest way to test and validate iVend Retail Web API is using SoapUI, because it's a well accepted software worldwide. It is freely available. It's free of license. So, and it shows you XML payload, what comes in response. You can actually see your XML payload, which the way you give parameters to the call and what output you get side by side. And you can define the XML for your request very easily. And it is very helpful when it gives you an opportunity to test the API function before doing the actual coding for your integration. So going forward, Priya can explain how to use a SoapUI tool.
Okay. This is a free tool you can download, and you just have to create a new SOAP project using the file menu. Once this dialog box appears, you have to provide the WSDL path of the web API. Here I have installed it on my local host and provided WSDL like this. Just click on OK, and the click of OK will get all the methods exposed on this endpoint of web service. So it also creates sample request XMLs. As you can see, here it is. It will look something like this. I have chosen this save state method, and left side is the request and right side would be my response. So once I have request and I have the save state method, I have to declare the minimum required parameters, that is ID, description and country ID. Make sure these are valid and just click on this play button, and on right side pane you can get the response. The message box will show success. If or not the parameters are correct, if parameters are wrongly provided, the message will be displayed here for your reference. You can identify if any field is missing here in the request, and you can easily use it. So iVend APIs fully supports SOAP, and you can use the SoapUI tool for testing your methods. Next is calling web service using API reference, which is simple as SOAP call using web API as service reference. You can anyway add iVend API as service reference in your Visual Studio project and can consume the methods. So here I am creating a simple Windows form application where I am going to add iVend API as a service reference. So here I have provided the service path where my service has been hosted, and it has identified the endpoint, and on click of OK, here I get the iVend API as service reference. So for using this, I have created the service client object, that is obj as here. So I'm going to use the same save state method, which on click of a button I'm going to save or either update, and we'll see how the save state method works. So on click of create state button, I'm creating a new state object to save a new state, and provided the required properties, that is like this description, and then I have used this new state object to pass in my save state method of my service client and saved it. And similarly in update status, I have created a state object, provided the properties, and got the key for reference to update and the country ID which is required, and passed it to save state method which will update it. So I'll move to the samples. All the samples referred in this PPT are available on CKP. This is the same sample I have explained. This is a REST call to iVend API, sample payload, and we'll move to next sample. So the next sample is to create UDTs and UDFs using iVend API as service reference. So here you see I have used iVend API as a service reference.
So the point is that in iVend 6.5 APIs, we do have APIs exposed to create user-defined table or create user-defined field, or you can update or save or delete data. So CRUD operations on user-defined table data is also possible. So you can think of a complete solution using the custom user-defined table and fields on top of iVend. So that's the power of iVend API today.
Yes. So this is simple. On click of this create UDT button, we are going to create a new UDT and will perform the CRUD operations on this created UDT. So similarly, I have created a service client object which is explained here, obj. I'm going to create a new user-defined table object and provide the required properties and set the properties as required. This UDT will have some UDFs, and so I have created a user-defined field details object and provided user-defined fields to it. I have chosen two fields, code and account number, and I'm going to use obj.create user-defined fields method, and have provided my sample UDT object to this method, and that will create a new UDT for me. Now you can see this create UDF method which will create a new UDF. You have to provide the UDT name. Here I have provided this sample UDT, and now I have provided the table name. This is existing table which is address, and I'm going to add a new UDF to this. So you can refer to this sample for any references for sample add-on, for any references for iVend API as service reference, also how to create UDTs and UDFs and perform CRUD operations on UDTs using iVend API as service reference. Next sample is to show you how to use another, this is the same I have explained in PPT, the save state method. So this is sample for calling web service using iVend API service reference. Back to the PPT. This is how, and this is what I explained in my sample. Next is how to debug iVend Retail Web APIs. iVend Retail Web APIs, as you saw, that these are nothing but Visual Studio projects or a SOAP core to your API. So there are two mechanisms, either to use API as service reference in your Visual Studio object, and you can debug it as a simple Windows application if you're using Windows application, and otherwise attaching it to your application. Next is to use the SoapUI tool, which I have explained earlier. Here you have the request, and in my save state method I haven't provided the ID, I have kept it blank, and once you play it using the play button, you'll get the message that object is invalid, error ID and so, which is quite readable and understandable that you are missing the ID. Also, there are chances that you are missing any particular property or attribute which is required in this request. Suppose I also require to provide the region ID and I am missing it. So the message will be clearly explained and will be readable for you to explain which are the minimum mandatory things you have to provide. So SoapUI can be easily used. So next topic is, which is really important, third-party integration using iVend Retail Web APIs. iVend Retail Web APIs are exposed for any third-party integrations. We already have integrated it with our mobile application, and you can use it for any third-party. For Sage, we have done it, Navision, and any other application you can choose.
All right. So any third-party application can be integrated in iVend Retail using APIs, and useful API functions are generally the get queue and other get queue functions based on your need. And then very importantly, if for some reason any object is not exposed, and if you understand the table structure using the database help in the developer's guide, then you can always write SQL query to get the data from iVend, and you can use get query result function and pass your SQL, and you will get the dataset result back for in your integration layer to process it further. Now, regarding third-party integrations, so what you can do is, we already have a sample available on CKP on extensibility page. So let me first introduce you to the extensibility page. So now, okay, now I have it, the web API help, which I would like to show you earlier, that if once you have the iVend API installed, you can, if you go to webhelp/help, then you will get all the functions available and their URL available for you to use them. Now, going forward with the CKP, once you are a logged in user, then go to extensibility, which is the last menu. All right, and then this is your one-stop shop, one dedicated page for all your extensibility needs. So under extensibility, two major things what we have is, one is the add-on development, another is API. For today's topic, iVend API. So you have all your sample projects for 6.5, you have all presentations available, you have help manuals, you have knowledge articles for 6.5, you have e-learning videos available, how to use APIs. So, and additionally, if you would like to train your team on web API topic, you can always go to the training kit section, and the second day is for the API. You can download second day training material from this button, and we have the presentation, samples, API guide, lab exercises, all well defined, and this will help you a lot in training your programming team on iVend APIs. Now, going forward, I'm coming back to the presentation. So when you generally need to do the integration, you need to develop a Windows service, and in Windows service, you need to make a reference to iVend API. this is the sample which explains how do you do that, and then you generally put a timer control in your Windows service whereby you keep polling the iVend API function the way we have done it in this example. Then once you have the data, you can process the data as mentioned here in the for loop. All right, going forward, I think that is it. This shows, explains you, I mean, once you have the data, what you can do with the data, you can call further more API function based on your business needs. And I guess that is it, Priya. And then now next section is the artifact resource links. So please refer to these resource links in case if you have missed any step during the session, and we have product documentation, knowledge base articles, e-learning videos on the same. Also this presentation slide and recording of the webinar will shortly be available on City Access Knowledge Portal for you. Going forward, I would like to open the forum for question and answer. So forum is now open for related questions. Anybody who has a question, please raise your hand or leave the question in the chat window. All right, then, so with this, I would like to conclude the session today and looking forward for the same participation in our next subsequent session as well. For more information, there are other channels available like support, forum on City Access Knowledge Portal, and so on. You can also directly contact us at marketing@cityaccess.com. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.
Thank you.